Hi, I'm Heather Clayston Staker, founder and president of Ready to Blend, and I'm delighted to be part of the Symposium for Healthy Christian Schools and thankful for the opportunity to be with you today and talk about a topic that's very near and dear to me, which is how to create higher performing, happier classrooms. Never has there been a time when we more urgently need to think about the well-being and achievement of children and the well-being of their parents and teachers as right now. And so we'll talk about some strategies that are high impact for leading to their academic achievement as well as overall well-being and joy as they are thinking about schooling at a time that's very different from other times in the history of education. I founded Ready to Blend in 2015. Prior to that, I was a senior research fellow for the Clayton Christensen Institute for Disruptive Innovation, where I had the opportunity to work with Professor Clayton Christensen of Harvard Business School to think about how we can use innovation to fix some of the problems that have vexed the education sector for a long time. And my work has specialized specifically in blended learning and how to use online learning and technology in ways that help children, that improve the lives of teachers, and that lead to an overall better student experience than one that would be possible if we only equipped classrooms with more devices and didn't think about the overall student experience. So that's really where my passion lies. So I want to begin by asking you to think of a time when you needed to be a creative problem solver to overcome a challenge you faced in your classroom or school. And while you're thinking about that time, let me tell you about Wangari's Trees of Peace. This is one of my favorite stories. It's the story of Wangari Maathai, who was born in 1940 in a small village in a verdant, fertile part of Kenya. But over the course of her life, she found the deforestation was just destroying the trees in her town and really in her country. And she didn't know what to do about it. She tried to block the government from cutting down more trees, and she was beaten and imprisoned. Eventually, she ended up planting 9 seedlings in her own land and then finding a way to encourage other women to plant seedlings until eventually 80,000 families increased their income from helping her plant trees. And she was able to, by 2004, plant 30 million trees, 6,000 nurseries in Kenya. And that effort then grew to influence 30 countries in Africa, and she was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. I love that example of someone who used their creative problem-solving abilities to tackle a real problem. Think of a time when you have had to do that, big or small, maybe not big enough to merit a Nobel Peace Prize, but think of that time, and we'll return to this idea of a mindset of creative problem solving because mindsets are a big part of becoming successful innovators in our classrooms. As I asked you to do that activity, you notice that I began with the sentence stem. Think of a time when. Oftentimes when we're leading discussions, it's helpful to begin with a Socratic sentence stem, such as think of a time when, or imagine if, or suppose you face option A or B, which would you choose? Those are good sentence stems for kicking off Socratic discussions. Many of your learners might be studying remotely right now, and as they engage in Zoom conversations, rather than lecturing to them, consider leading a Socratic discussion that begins with one of these sentence stems. So Socratic discussions should be open-ended, no right answer, and high energy because they're personally relevant to you. Just a thought as we're kicking this off. So let me tell you about my journey through the research world of blended learning. When I first started looking at blended learning, which is really defined as when brick and mortar students who are enrolled in a brick and mortar school do some online learning as part of their program. It used to be that most of that online learning was at school. These days, we're seeing a lot of the online learning happening remote from school. But in the early days, and still to this day, when we see students doing online learning, oftentimes we see something that looks more or less like this visual. Perhaps if it's at a home, it's fewer students. But we really picture just students plugged into devices. My intention with you today is to expose you to 7 moves that can round out the student experience. So it's not students plugged into devices when we think about blended learning and high quality student experiences, but instead we're designing for the whole child and planning pedagogical experiences that lead to students who are happy and high performing. And in fact, the work I'll be talking about is based on a white paper that's available at the Christensen Institute by that very name, How to Create Higher Performing, Happier Classrooms in 7 Moves. This work came about because David Richards, Jennifer Wu, and Mallory Dwinnell, pictured in this image, wanted to write a research report where they looked at the best managers at the most successful organizations in America, figure out what they were doing right to create successful organizations, and then see whether we could port those same management principles into our classrooms, which I thought was a very interesting research project, and I came aboard as the lead author for this paper. And really, the way that they and we decided to define good managers was across 2 dimensions. One is we wanted to look at those along the y-axis who had happy teams. And then along the x-axis, we wanted to look at those whose teams were successfully performing. We weren't as interested in those who had happy teams, but they weren't getting anything done. Nor were we as interested in those who had successful teams, but they were all miserable. But what we really were interested in was how do we help managers who have unhappy teams, who aren't successful, migrate to becoming managers who have teams that are successful and high performing. And it turns out that Google has done a lot of rigorous research on this very question for their company. And so that was one of the places that we looked for what findings emerged from their research. And then we took the findings and crosswalked them into the K-12 classroom to apply them to an educational setting. And what we found was that the principles of the best managers, those who were able to have high-performing, happier classrooms, did 7 things. And here I'll position them in a way that's translated into education vernacular. But the first was they cultivated mindsets. In these organizations, they actually hired for specific mindsets and then definitely nurtured them. We can't necessarily select students based on mindsets, but we certainly can take the students that we have and help nurture specific mindsets. Release control. So the managers learned to not micromanage their teams. And in a similar way, teachers can develop that same skill. Encourage teaming, helping their people learn to work together in spontaneous and constructive ways to help each other. Give feedback. So the best managers gave their employees really great feedback. Build relationships of trust. The great managers showed concern and care in a way that built trust with the people that they managed. Help students hold themselves accountable. And then finally, hold yourself accountable. So that's a preview. Let's dive more deeply into those 7 moves. So specifically, cultivating mindsets. The teachers, we took those 7 moves and we ran a series of pilot tests to see what they would look like on the ground in classrooms. And on the left, you'll see a bulletin board that a first, second grade combination teacher created as they were working on the mindset of teaming. And in this case, she specifically said, here's what teaming is. Let's create a mantra around it. And they discussed it a lot. On the right side, you'll see a picture from one of the pilots that was done in a 9th grade Algebra 1 classroom. So these were older students, and you'll see there that they're teaming, they're really working together, and she wanted to nurture that behavior so that it was a common practice for students to know how to peer coach each other and help each other through their work. So let me tell you about 2 different strategies that these pilot teachers used, and I'm curious to know which you think would be the most successful. The first was some of the teachers explicitly taught mindsets. So, for example, they would read a book like I just discussed with you, Wangari's Trees of Peace, and discuss the mindset of creative problem solving, and look at her as a protagonist who helped fix the deforestation problem in Kenya, and then said, what can we learn from this? How can we also develop creative problem-solving mindsets? These classrooms brought in community heroes to hear their stories and then had a Socratic discussion around what are the mindsets that these heroes teach to us. They watched TED videos where the TED Talks sometimes showcase someone who has a mindset that's enviable. So those were strategies to specifically say, here's a mindset that will help you in your learning. Let's look at a protagonist or a hero who exemplifies this mindset and then have a Socratic discussion around what strategies would help us similarly cultivate that mindset. Okay, that's option 1. Option 2 was some of the teachers found that Their students did best if they explicitly made the connection between a mindset and a habit. So instead of thinking really high level conceptually around what does it look like to be a creative problem solver, or what does it look like to act with agency, instead they said, here are the specific habits that you might show if you had the mindset of agency. So if in the upper left-hand quadrant there, agency, some habits that this teacher identified where the student would say, I know what I need to do to achieve my goals. I use strategies to help myself stay on track. And she gave them some examples. If I'm not on track, I figure out how to get back on track, and so forth. The reason that this checklist of habits was helpful to her was that then when a student was struggling, she could meet with that learner and pull out the checklist of habits and say, which of these habits might help you improve your mindset? So suppose you want to work on your agency mindsets. Which of these habits would be the most helpful to you this week? And what could you do to inculcate that habit into your routine as a learner this week? And so then they would have a discussion. So think about that. These two options, which option do you think would work the best with your students to nurture mindsets? Holding up heroic examples and having Socratic discussions about them, or having a checklist of habits? Make a note of that and consider that as you're thinking about your strategy for teaching and nurturing mindsets. Let's look at the second move. But before we do that, I've just been thinking about this phrase, diligence of mind. And it's occurred to me because there are negative winds in the air these days. There are a lot of people that are experiencing trauma and negativity as a result of the hard things that our society is going through. And I like the phrase diligence of mind. I heard someone say it. And so my question for you, my challenge goal, is to think about what mindset, meaning like a sentence in your brain, could you practice right now so that you're better able to model courage for your students or for your school? And I just would love it if you would take note of that as well. One way to cultivate a diligent mindset is by choosing specific thoughts that are related to modeling courage. So perhaps there's a thought that would shift your mindset in that way. Okay, the second move is to release control. Historically, there are two main ways that the school teacher can release control. So she's not micromanaging the students as much, not as much asking them to sit and listen while she spoon feeds the material. And one of the ways is through a station rotation model, where students might be working online part of the time and then working in a small group with the teacher part of the time, and perhaps doing a collaborative project with their peers part of the time, and then rotating. In an era where many students are not back in a face-to-face school right now, this is not applicable for all schools. But historically, this has been one way that teachers have started to become familiar with the just opportunity to release control. As that teacher's delivering the small group, obviously he or she can't be controlling everything that the students are doing in the other stations. So it takes a shift for that teacher to think of empowering learners in that way. Another way teachers can shift and really gradually release control to learners is through more of a flex model, where all of the content and instruction is posted online on a platform so that students can access it when and where works best for them. And then the teacher schedules enrichment activities and discussions and collaborative projects to correspond to that content, but is no longer at all the primary person delivering the content. Many schools at this moment are shifting to a flex model because of the flexibility. So which of those two options is the most intriguing to you? If you think about making the move of releasing control to your learners, I'm telling you from the research that what we find is that these moves lead to higher performing, happier classrooms. So if you can start to get in the mindset of releasing control to your learners, which of these two is the most interesting and intriguing to you? And we can go into more depth about how would you actually set up these models. But as a preview, this is really where our classrooms are headed. And at the high school and middle school level, we see especially a lot of flex models developing. Third move is to encourage teaming. So one way to encourage teaming is to have the discipline to ensure that you actually have team building activities baked into your schedule. This is hard for teachers when there are a lot of subject content learning objectives that you want to hit. You have a lesson plan you want to make sure you have time for. To pause and think about how do you build the team as one of your priorities is really difficult. But the value of it is that as you connect your learners, they're better able to support each other, and ultimately that helps free up your time, which is critical so that you can make some of the later moves we're going to discuss. So taking the time to encourage teaming, there are online ways to do that. If you just Google search Conversationalist Challenge or Push-Up Pro Challenge, you'll see some challenges that I've used to encourage teaming among youth. Another way to do it is by offering rewards and incentives as students learn to help each other. So this is what's called an independence progression, where a learner might begin by just learning to be self-directed, just learning how to drive some of their own learning. And then perhaps they learn how to set their own goals and how to find out if they're in flow or not, whether or not they're actually working in a focused way as they're doing their independent work. And then they're almost always in flow and they start to lead by example. And then maybe they're starting to lead a squad. They can lead other students. And then finally, they're able to lead Socratic discussion, lead the team building activities. This is just an example, but it models how you might think about helping a learner progress from just learning how to manage themselves into being able to be a real team leader and being specific about what that learning progression would look like, and then offering rewards as students demonstrate competency along each of the rungs of the ladder. So for example, initially that student might not have very much leeway to set their own schedule, to decide when to have a break, to decide when to have a snack, whereas a student who's at level 5 would have broad prerogative to work wherever they want, whenever they want, because they're showing that they're fully capable of that kind of not only self-management, but also team management. So if you were to choose between those two strategies, intentional team building activities or some kind of an independence progression where you help students see the pathway from independent learning to collaborative leadership, which of those two do you think would help you the most to establish teaming within your classroom? Perhaps make a note of that. It's a critical move. And part of the reason it's a critical move is that once you have released some control as the teacher, once you have established teaming, once you've nurtured mindsets, then you're in a position to be able to give individual feedback. And that's the fourth move. The reason that this is important, in fact, Deloitte & Touche, a successful consulting firm, says that this is the killer app for successful management. That when good managers take the time to give individual feedback and show that they're interested in the individual growth of the people that they manage, that's when they get the most positive results. And I'm not talking about high stakes feedback, the type of feedback where it's a grade that goes in the books forever. I mean the feedback that's specifically geared towards improvement, towards helping your learners grow and thrive. This is very hard to do in a traditional classroom because teachers just do not have time to meet individually to give them feedback. But what we found is that when teachers nurture mindsets, gradually release control, and nurture teaming, then their time gets freed up. And what do they do with that time? The best managers and the best teachers use that time to give feedback, as you're seeing depicted here. This is a picture from Khan Academy Lab School. If you're familiar with the Khan Academy math program, Sal Khan on the ground level of his office building has a lab school where they experiment with some of their methodology. And so this is a picture from the lab school that I visited where you can see them really using this principle of giving individual feedback to learners to help them grow. One tool to help you give feedback is just a simple student survey to see whether or not students feel like you're successfully giving them feedback. At Google, managers frequently give their employees a survey called the Google Oxygen Survey that they use to find out whether or not the people who they manage feel like they're successfully giving them feedback and building relationships of trust with them. And so in the report, How to Create Higher Performing Happier Classrooms in 7 Moves, we translated that Google Oxygen Survey into a Google Oxygen Survey for teachers. And so I would recommend that you use this survey now. with your students as kind of a pre-test for yourself to see whether or not they agree with statements like, my teacher gives me feedback that I can use to improve my schoolwork. My teacher tells me how my work and behavior are evaluated. My teacher often gives me positive feedback for things I do well. My teacher praises me in front of others for my work and behavior, and so forth. Use that as a pretest, and then see if you can nudge these numbers up as you get better and better at making move number 4 of giving feedback. The 5th move, and it's a companion to the 4th move, is building relationships of trust. Together, those 2 moves, giving feedback and building relationships of trust, define the role of a teacher as a teacher more and more evolves into being a coach, sort of like someone who stands on the sidelines and becomes an excellent coach. Join me in watching this video about what great coaches do, and as you do, consider what are the principles you can extract about great coaching.
Part of being a good coach is building relationships of trust. I was one of those kids that was kind of lost in the weeds. A lot of stuff didn't exactly make sense right off the bat, so I felt like I was constantly behind and constantly just not where everybody else was. Then Coach Fernandez came into my life. He sat me down one day and had an honest conversation with me to let me know that I was messing up and let me know that I could do it and let me know that it was possible for me to pass certain classes and graduate and go on to do bigger and better things. With us having that relationship and that trust, I knew that what he was telling me was really there to help me. With that trust, I went to him more. So when there was problems, when there was parts, when I felt like I couldn't do something, I had somebody to go to. If every teacher would have been like that, oh man, what a world that would have been.
The most powerful tool that we have are our caring teachers, the individuals that interact with students on a daily basis. It's our #1 plan in the school to help students obtain academic success. We can't alleviate every issue and every situation from students, but what we can do is we can provide every student with a caring adult that they can meet with, that they can talk with, that can help them overcome barriers. If they have that adult that's constantly following up with them, setting goals with them, helping them achieve those goals, it's going to help them overcome challenges through the rest of their life and going to help them be successful.
So coming up in language arts, you have just as much as when you're in a traditional classroom that you need to have great relationships with your students. It's true for online courses as well. I really work hard at the beginning to get to know the students and what they're interested in, and let them know about myself as well, that I'm a safe person to talk to. A lot of times when I meet with my students, it's in small groups or one-on-one, so it really gives them a safe space where they can come and feel like they can talk to me.
At 9/11 Museum, that sounds so interesting.
It's a huge benefit is that I do know each of my students as an individual. It helps me to give them feedback that they're ready for. And if I know that today is a really good day, then I know I can take them to the next level and really challenge them.
As the principal of an online school, it's no less important and maybe even more important that I work hard to build relationships of trust with my teachers, because I need them to be able to do that with students. And so they need to be able to feel comfortable talking to me about the unique challenges of online learning. Some of the ways I build those relationships of trust are by not micromanaging them, but really showing a genuine interest in them as an educator and in their pathway and career.
So now, as a coach, being on the other side, connecting with individual students is so important. To see them going from being so frustrated about school, but then after some time and after working that relationship with them, that they're now happy and they're excited and they feel in charge of their own situation and their own life, that they, get to take control of what's going on. It's amazing. It's why I wake up every morning.
So the Google Oxygen survey for teachers also has some questions for students to consider as to give you feedback about your ability to be a good coach and to build relationships of trust. So if you use this tool, you might be able to do you could do a pretest to see whether students agree with concepts like, my teacher cares about me. My teacher helps me feel like I am part of the school community. My teacher cares about me having friends at school. My teacher works hard to help us learn. My teacher is a good role model. Some of these, the answers you get from your students might be illuminating. You might find that you don't score highly in all of these categories. But as you get better and better at move number 5, you'll see those results improving. So I encourage you to use this tool as a pre-test and a post-test this year to see how well you're doing at move number 5. Move number 6, help students hold themselves accountable. So as students are setting their goals, as you've released control to them, it's not just blind control where they have free prerogative to do whatever they want while you're meeting individually with students or doing whatever you want. There's still accountability, and that's the flip side of freedom, is the accountability, holding your learners accountable for what they've accomplished. One way to do that is simply with making their data transparent. So whether it's a paper-based tracker, here's one that Josephine uses to track her progress on the Lexia software program, where she's a first grader, and she colors in each time she makes progress on a lesson in Lexia. It might be that you're using a digital platform where students can see their progress, but to the extent that you make their progress transparent to them, they'll have a better and easier time holding themselves accountable. As you're choosing a platform for your content, and as you're setting up that platform, think about it from the student's point of view. Can they see their data? Do they see what's expected of them over the course of the week and the month and the semester, and then how they're doing and how well they're making progress? It's not enough to just look at the teacher dashboard, but really evaluate that student dashboard. You'll find that your students are happier and more successful as they experience daily progress. So ultimately, you'll want to chunk up your content in a way that helps them every single day see that they're making incremental progress. What could you do to help your students hold themselves accountable? A few strategies to consider. Have radically frequent one-on-one check-ins with them so that they know that you are frequently checking in on their progress and caring about their progress and checking in with them about it. Build a relationship of trust with them so that they know that you care about them. And then set goals in their challenge zone, not in their comfort zone, but not in their panic zone, but help them set goals in their challenge zone and then reflect on them each week so that they are experiencing progress in their zone of proximal development. Choose one of these. Which of these strategies would help you empower your learners to hold themselves accountable the most? I encourage you to note one of these that you might try doing even better. And then finally, hold yourself accountable. Just as your students need to see their daily progress and track it, what are your personal goals related to these 7 moves, and how will you hold yourselves accountable? Will you have a peer who is a running partner with you? Will you set your own personal goals and then manage it in a personal planner? What will you do to make sure that you're setting goals and then tracking them over time? The pre-test and post-test, the Google Oxygen Survey for Teachers, is another tool you could use to help hold yourself accountable relative to these moves. So we've discussed a few moves. In the category of empowering your team and not micromanaging, the 3 steps are to teach mindsets, specifically nurture mindsets like agency, creativity, growth mindset, and passion for learning. Release control. Provide content and resources that students are free to access without your direct instruction. Post it online. Post it on the walls. Help your students be able to move forward without waiting for you. And then encourage teaming. Foster peer-to-peer learning and collaboration. Those 3 moves will empower your team, and they're critical so that then you can be a good coach. What do you do as a coach? Give feedback. Students receive personal, frequent, and actionable feedback in the moment, in small groups, and in one-on-ones. One-on-one check-ins are one of my favorite things to observe in a classroom. And then build relationships of trust. Show interest and concern in students as individuals and trust in their ability to drive their own learning. And then the last big bucket is to emphasize accountability. With that choice and freedom comes accountability. Help students hold themselves accountable. Give them tools to set goals, track their progress, see their progress in transparent ways, and then follow through. And then hold yourself accountable. Use reflection time, your own peers and colleagues, student surveys, and self-assessments to make sure that you are on track. Personally, I want to conclude by leaving you with a specific invitation. What is one move that you will make in the next 3 days, even if you're busy? And my promise to you is that sometimes when it comes to doing the right thing, you'll find that your time is freed up. So even though it's hard to think about shifting practice right now, making these 7 moves will actually help free up your time so that you can be using it in ways that lead to a more joyful experience for you and for your students. How will you do it? And how will you hold yourself accountable? I invite you to note your responses to these 3 questions. If you'd like more content that's aligned to these principles, I have a Ready to Blend podcast where I talk about these principles and others like them frequently. So subscribe to the Ready to Blend podcast. I also email out about every 2 weeks a free resource like a template or a tracker or a video to align to these concepts. And so if you'll go to readytoblend.com/Tuesdays, you can have access to those. That is, in a nutshell, 7 moves to create higher performing, happier classrooms. As I look at the school year ahead and in the years ahead, these are uncertain times, and our children need us to meet the moment with strategies that help them to thrive. Our teachers, each one of you who's a teacher, needs strategies that are modernized and better able to accommodate the demands of the day, and our schools must pivot to be able to be the flexible and more joyful learning environments that we aspire to. So I invite you to make the moves in the next few days that will help you better meet the needs of your students, be more joyful as a teacher, and help your schools progress into a fruitful and positive decade ahead. Thanks for joining me today.